So our cutting is done and it's time to head to the sewing machine. Make sure you have a nice neutral bobbin that will blend in with your fabrics. A couple of full bobbins because this will take a lot of thread. And that's about it for now. In a little bit we'll need to heat up our iron so we can start some pressing. But for now, the sewing machine and thread and the 1/4 inch foot are going to be good to go. All right, it's time to start sewing. I sat down on the floor with my pieces of focus fabric and I sorted them into piles of 5. And I just crisscrossed them over each other so I can pick up 5 at a time and sew them together end to end. So that's just me. I have friends who would say, oh, just throw them in a paper bag and pick them out at random. And that's a good way to do it too. It's all up to you and what you're comfortable with. So I've got my pile here, and what they want us to do is sew these together end to end. So the short ends go together, and you're going to sew 5 of the 10-inch strips together, short ends together. So that's what we're going to do. I've got my machine all threaded up with neutral thread, and I've got my 1/4 inch foot on the machine. And I'm going to put my stitch length down to about 2.25, and I'm going to start sewing. So I'll sew a little bit and then you guys can sew yours. So I'm going to put them right sides together, which I love. There are so many great sewing machines on the market nowadays too. They're just all awesome. But I've had my 570 for a couple of years now and I really like it. I would highly recommend it. Another piece on there. We're not going to worry about doing any pressing right away because we still have to sew the background strip on. So, but right now we're just going to focus on, we have to create 32 sets of 5. So that'll keep us busy for a while. But once again, put on some music, put on 90 Day Fiance. I'm getting choked up. Put on 90 Day Fiance, put on some Pandora, some fun music, and just relax. Because sewing is meant to be a relaxing hobby. We want to relax. Anything that you have to get all stressed out about every time you do it is not any fun to do it. So this is a nice, relaxing, forgiving quilt pattern that you can work on. And I think it's going to come up with something really pretty at the end. So I got one more to sew on here. These colors are so rich and beautiful. I think it would be fun to do one of these quilts in an ombre fabric. If you had an ombre jelly roll, you could maybe even put all the yellow and orange toward the center and then have it work out into colors around the edges. I think that would be really pretty too. So many possibilities when we sew, isn't it? And it's a wonderful thing to be creative. So here's my first set of 5 strips that I sewed together. And I need to make 31 more and then we'll be all set. So let's get our strips sewn together, and when we come back, we'll attach the background pieces. I've sewn all of my 10-inch pieces together of my focus fabric. So I've got hopefully 32 pieces with 5 10-inch pieces per strip. So that's done. And so now the next step is to attach the background strips. Remember the background strips that we cut earlier? The 16 2.5-inch strips, and we trimmed off that fold to make 32 2.5-inch strips, and we trimmed the selvages too. So now what I'm going to do is take, for every strip of 5 that I've got, I take a piece of that background fabric and I sew it to the end of each end. So, and you want to make sure it's not twisted and it's right sides together. And so we're going to sew those pieces together. And then after that, we're going to press all the seams, just going in the same direction, whatever's most convenient at your ironing board. Just go ahead and press those seams flat, and then we'll move on to the next step. So you need to sew the background pieces on, and then you're going to end up with a circle like this. And make sure they're right sides together. My background fabric, it's kind of hard to see the right from the wrong side, so I have to really hold it up under the LED, you know, to make sure I'm doing the right side, the correct side. But right sides together, sew it together, and make one continuous loop, and then press the seams all going in the same direction. Okay, I've got all my strips sewn together, so I've got 32 circles with my 10-inch pieces and then my background piece that I sewed on. So now take them one at a time, and I'm just gonna pull it around the ironing board and press the seams all going in the same direction. We just want to have flat seams so that when we go to sew these together, that we have nice seams that'll lay flat. So there's one. Just kind of pull them around the ironing board. I suppose I could probably do 2 or 3 at a time. Maybe I'll try that. Give them a good press so those seams are going to lay really flat. And that's what you need to do. When we come back, we'll talk about the next step, which is cutting the background piece and then assembly. Here's a little pressing tip. I've got, I'm going to press them 3 strips at a time, and I've got them lined up in the same spot on each strip. I've got the background fabric all here together, and I'm just going to press, and I'm going to pull up to the next seam and line that next seam up and press, kind of just press and pull. That way I can do 3 at a time. That'll save you a little bit of time on your pressing. I'm just pressing them all away from me. It really doesn't matter which direction you press the seams. Anyway, I just wanted to give you that little pressing tip. Now I have all my circular pieces ironed. I ironed all 32 of them, and like I showed you, I just kind of put them on the ironing board and rotated them. But the pattern writer didn't mention anything about pressing, but I think it is important to press these seams down before we start sewing them together. So the next thing that we need to do is to make a random cut somewhere in this background piece on all 32 pieces. And the idea is to make the cuts random and varied so that you will get the up and down effect that they show in this quilt. So what I decided to do was to make my cuts in increments of 2 inches. So I'm going to cut some that are 2 inches from the start. I just randomly choose which end I want to use for this to start measuring from. So I did 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 are the cuts I'm going to make. And I'm just going to kind of cut an equal number, or pretty much an equal number of each from my 32 pieces. So I've already got 2 laying here that are layered together. And I'm just going to put a 3rd one here. And I'm going to cut this one at my 10-inch. So I'm going to lay my ruler on here. And here's my 10-inch mark, and I've got that on the seam. And that's about the halfway point, actually. So these will be the ones that are kind of neutral. So I'm going to make a cut here at my 10-inch mark. But the reason I'm using the rotary cutter, the instructor says just to cut at random, implying like a pair of scissors or something. And I wanted to do it with the rotary cutter because I want my cuts to be straight, because I don't want to have to do a lot of evening up once I've got my pieces all together. So go ahead and make your cuts, and then when we come back, we will be at the design wall, and we'll be putting some of these up and see how they're going to look. All right, I've got all my strips cut, and I've got them up on my design wall here, and it's looking pretty crazy. This calf fabric is so colorful, isn't it? It's just beautiful. I arranged it kind of how I want it, and I tried to avoid having 2 prints next to each other. So I think this is how it's going to be. I'm going to take a photo of it with my phone so that I know what I was doing, and I can keep track of it as I go along. The next step is to sew the rows together, or the columns, whatever you want to call them, in groups of 2, and then you want to press them as you sew them. So I've got 32 strips here, so then I'm going to sew them in groups of 2, then I'll have 16, and then you'll sew them in groups of 4 and press, but you want to press every time you sew 2 together, because if you did not press, this would be a huge pressing ordeal to do this all at once. So I recommend that you follow the directions on that. So I'm going to start sewing this together, and you can follow along with me. Okay, I've got all my strips sewn together, and this is what the final, not final, but the semi-final output looks like. What we have left to do next is to sew the border strip along the top and along the bottom. So I'll be showing you how to do that in the next segment. Now I'm going to show you how to miter the fabric strips together that you're going to use for your upper and lower border. It's not absolutely necessary to miter, but I think it does make the transition look smoother rather than having a single vertical seam, that's going to pull the eye. So I'm going to show you how to do this just in case you haven't done it before. Chances are you've done it before, but I will go ahead and demo that for you now. So I've got my fabric laid out on my cutting table. I've got this fabric like this, and I've got my straight edge that I cut lined up, and I'm going to take my other piece of fabric, let's put it like this, and I've got my other piece of fabric, and I'm going to lay it right sides together with the top one at a right angle to the bottom one. So this is what it looks like across right here. So you can see if I lay my hand here like this and I fold them back, it's going to create that miter line that we're looking for. To actually create my sewing line, I know that some people like just to eyeball it and call it a day, but I like for things to be a little more exact than that. I'm going to just make a little mark up here and down here. So I've got my fabrics in position. This mark up here is where the two pieces of fabric come together. So when I fold this one back, that other one is down here. And so that's this mark right here. And then I've got another mark down here where the two fabrics come together. And I'm going to lay my ruler across those marks. And I'm going to make a mark with my heat soluble pen. And that is going to be my stitching line. So I've got that stitching line marked. You can just kind of see it there. And I'm going to do the exact same thing to create my other border piece. So now I have sewn my two pieces of fabric together. You can see on the line here, I sewed right along the line. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off that excess fabric. Let me show you. I'm going to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Trim it off. And then I'm going to press it open, and it's going to look like this piece that I already did. So you can see how that seam is really not all that visible on that piece of fabric. I think it's going to look really nice. It's not going to be highly noticeable. So next I'm going to sew my borders on my quilt, and then we're going to have the big reveal. I'm at my sewing machine ready to sew on that border strip, and I want to just give you a couple of tips. I did stick a few pins in here just to kind of hold everything even Steven. And I also planned ahead, I wanted to plan ahead and make sure that this seam of joining my two border strips together wasn't going to land on one of my seams for my 2.5 inch strips. So I planned it so that the seam will be right in the center. So I didn't want all that bulk in one place at the top of my quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've put my pins in, and I've put them in more than a 1/4 inch back so I can just pull them out and not worry if I sew past one, because they're not going to go under that presser foot. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've got my 1/4 inch foot on, and I've got my stitch length is at 2.20. So let's go ahead and sew these down. I am also sewing from the 2.5 inch strip side so that I can make sure my seams don't flip, because I've pressed my seams flat, and I want to make sure they don't flip while I'm sewing. So I'm going to sew this seam, and then I'm going to press, and then I'm going to do the other one and press. My quilt top is complete. I put the 6.5 inch border on the top and on the bottom, and it quickly outgrew the length of my design wall. But I think it looks really good. I love the calf jelly roll. I think that was a good choice for this quilt. I think it would also be really pretty in scrappy fabrics. I think you could go through your stash and cut some 2.5 inch by 10 pieces and piece them together. I think that would be really cool. I think it would make a nice baby quilt. You could downsize it and pick some pastel fabrics and make a baby quilt. I think it would be a really pretty quilt made out of batik fabrics. So I think this quilt has a lot of possibilities, and I think it's very well suited for a beginner quilter, because basically you just have to know how to press and know how to sew straight lines, and that's what we all need to know how to do as quilters, right? Thank you for taking my class on the meet in the middle quilt. I hope you'll make another one once you've made yours. And I think I'm going to keep this pattern around. I like it quite a bit. Thank you very much. Hope to have you in a class again soon. Have a great day.